So, hi Ken, what was your first computer?
My first computer was a Commodore 64. I think we probably got it around, might have been 83, but probably more like 84. And that was the first computer we ever had at the house. And at the time, it was mostly just for like playing games and having fun. I guess you could say I got a little bit more serious with computers with the next one, which we got, which was a Commodore 128D,
Hmm.
which had a lot more functionality with it. Actual proper like 5 1/4 discs and all that kind of stuff. I think we probably got that maybe like 86 ish, something like that. And that's when I really started like playing around with learning BASIC and things like that.
The 128, it was the Commodore, which was it was a little bit longer, right? So it
Yeah, it was more like what you would typically think of a desktop PC in terms of it had like the long front and it was a
yeah
lot deeper than just. Whereas the 64 was almost like just a big fat keyboard.
yeah exactly. So actually,
Yeah.
forgot about that. So for me, it was the Amiga 500, the next one. But this was something between.
Yeah, we looked at. I think we looked at the Amigas, and because I was kind of interested in learning programming at the time, it felt like the 128D was a better option for that.
Hmm.
But I knew a lot of people had Amigas as well.
Why you became interested in programming?
Probably because of my father, in the sense that although he was a civil engineer and used to design dams and things like that, I think it was probably in the early 80s he switched over to their computer-aided design division. So he was involved in that. So I distinctly remember in the 80s going to visit him in Sydney, and he'd show me these like huge computing rooms that were like all closed off in glass and air conditioned and all this kind of stuff. So it was probably through him and what he was doing that got me originally interested in programming.
Okay, and what was the idea? So you wanted to start programming in order to design a dam, or what was the idea?
So for me, the 128D, I started playing around with trying to create a Star Wars game,
Ah,
but obviously that was rather tedious, and having to draw each sprite and have it like
yeah,
the initial bit I was doing was like approaching the Death Star kind of thing,
yeah.
and it was like having to draw the sprite bigger and bigger and bigger. It was like very tedious programming with BASIC, and I think after a while I gave up and stopped trying to program with at least games with BASIC anyway at the time.
Were you somehow successful with the Dark Star? So were you actually you saw something on the screen already, or
Oh yeah, I could. I think I went through a phase of maybe having maybe up to 10 seconds of like a dot on a screen, and it would slowly get bigger as you went towards it. And then I think I stopped at that point. I think something else must have grabbed my attention.
it's still remarkable? I mean, 10 seconds is already a lot of work, I would say.
Yeah, it was a lot of ASCII art to make that possible.
Exactly. And what was the next project?
I don't know if I did anything else on the 128Ds at that time. What am I thinking? That was primary school. So yeah, we didn't have computers at primary school, but I know in '88, which was my first year of high school, I bought myself my own first computer, which was an XT from Gateway,
Oh,
um, and that had like, oh god, what did that have? That I think it had a 20 meg hard drive, and I think it was 640K RAM, and that was like a huge beast at the time. But and it was great because my dad would bring home all these old software that they didn't need at work anymore. So he'd bring me like DBase 4, Lotus 123, all this kind of stuff, so I could play with those at home.
mhm,
I think he even brought me Delphi at one point.
mhm.
Play with that, yeah.
The Gateway brand was also available in Germany, I remember. So you could
Okay.
actually buy Gateway computers in Germany. So I did do like a little bit a niche, but they were available. So you remember me about Gateway computer. And what do you wanted to achieve with the computer? Build a game again, or
At that time, I think it was mostly just exploring what it could do, and I was playing around at the time because I had it. I was playing around with databases and trying to understand those.
why? I mean, why?
I don't
Why?
know. I think it was just because Dad brought it home. I was like, oh, I'll play with this and try and learn some of it. And it's it was interesting because at the time I would have been like maybe 13, 14, something like that. but it was a lot of fun. And to be honest, I never got to the stage of like having doing anything with the old board modems and things like that. At least that I recall. I may have had a modem at some point, but that might have been a couple of years later.
Okay.
But yeah, it was mostly just to play around. Occasionally, I'd play games on it, but it was mostly just to play around, try and get to understand things. I certainly would never classify myself as a hacker in that sense. It was just kind of like playing around.
But what you stored in the database?
I'm trying to think. It might have been storing things like. Oh, hang on. No, that was high. Yeah, it might have been. Because I know at one point in high school, I think when we were using microbees in the computer lab in high school, I was trying to create a statistical program for. Let me try and remember. I think it was for baseball at the time. Basically capturing statistics and trying to do what we know today as like the whole, what do they call it, Moneyball kind of situation of being able to look at statistics of players over previous years and judge whether they're going to be good into the future. I think I was trying to create something like that back in, oh God, what that would have been about like 89, 90, something like that, yeah.
There was BEA World. I think there was an old conference. And BA World prior to Oracle World. And I was invited to the conference because I was BA technical director, which basically meant something like a Java champion for BA. And this is because I just use BA and they just said, okay, now you are a director. And then they invited me to the conference and I delivered a talk. And after the conference, they invited me to a game and they say, you have to come with us. It's lots of fun. And I think it was baseball, 49ers. I think this is baseball, right?
49ers is NFL. That's football.
No, the football. Then was in the stadium in San Francisco. It's outside, but it was
the Giants.
The Giants, exactly, the Giants.
Yeah.
And okay, I never saw baseball, and everyone was excited. And something happens. There was a short movement. And then spreadsheets, lots of statistics. It's like, what the hell is going on? And I said, okay. And everyone was excited. And a short movement, and again, statistics. And for me, it was even worse than soccer. I don't like. I'm from Germany, but soccer is already boring. And I saw the baseball, and I just watched. There was it was a never-ending game. The baseball with the spreadsheets. So I believe
Yeah, it's. I guess I hadn't really been exposed to baseball that much until I moved to the US like 10 years ago, or even actually probably a little before meeting my now wife at the time, 15 years ago. But I've been to a few games at the Red Sox in Boston, and initially it was like all exciting. It was great to be there. And then it's like after a while, a few years later, it's kind of like, 3.5 hours to watch a game. That's a lot of time when not a whole lot happens.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I've kind of drifted away from now. I'll check in occasionally and see what's going on. But yeah, and particularly with, under normal circumstances, a season with like 180 odd games, that's a lot of 3-hour increments to lose to just watch baseball.
Yeah, and they always show these statistics, right? So there was like a spreadsheet, and I had no idea. I tried to find out what it actually means, and I had no idea. Now, you create this stats game for baseball, and then what happened then?
Let me think. I don't know if I did a whole lot in the latter years of high school. I think I was.
Where you went to high school? London, or where was it?
No, I went to high school in Sydney.
You are from Australia?
Yeah. I grew up there, but my father's from London. But he moved out to Australia when he was a kid. But yeah, I grew up in Sydney, and I left there in 99 is when I left and moved to Europe and started living over there and traveling around and working various places from there.
Cool.
But after the stats game, what did I do? I don't have a strong recollection of anything that happened next for quite a while. And probably the last things I remember next are like what I did at like university. So like learning C++, doing.
You studied computer science?
Yeah. Well, it was my degree was kind of a hybrid. It was a Bachelor of Science, but it was majoring in information systems. Mm-hmm. So that meant I did a lot of businessy stuff, but also a lot of comp sci kind of stuff as well. So we had like C++, Modular 2. We had assembly language as well at one point, which was really mind-bending. But then I also did things like company law and business law and economics and all that kind of stuff. It was a very mixed degree.
And you enjoyed that?
It was definitely interesting because it certainly gave me a good grounding in a lot of the business side of things that is important, particularly as doing consulting kind of stuff. It's important to know that kind of thing. So that was definitely very beneficial. Sometimes I look back and think it would have been nice to do more on the comp sci side. But these days, there's so much stuff available online that anything I didn't learn back then, I can easily find resources to learn now.
Yeah, you say that, but no, you have to have the discipline to sit down and actually watch it.
Well, there is that too. And there's certainly a prevalence of information overload to know what the right information is, because there's so many different sources. It can be challenging to find a good source on a particular topic.
This is why I enjoy the JavaONE so much, because I force myself, to stay entire day in the building and just watch talks. So I think that from the first one, I scheduled the entire day. It was like a marathon. So I think 14 hours a day just, and it was completely energized after the week. But you cannot do this online. I cannot imagine watching the entire day, 14 hours video. So it is impossible.
Yeah, no, certainly with videos and with a lot of stuff moving to like virtual events these days, it's certainly a challenge. Because I know personally for myself, I can't just sit and watch 7-8 hours of videos of people presenting. Maybe 2 or 3, and then at that point, it's like, I need to do something else. Yeah. But that's certainly a challenge in these times.
Yeah. So you studied computer science, and you already did something with Java during the study?
Actually, no, I don't think I did, because university for me would have been 94 through 96, and obviously Java came out in 95. Mm-hmm. So I don't think any of the courses would have been touching on that because it was so new. In the C++, I think I have vague recollections of mentions of Java at that time, but I don't think we actually ever used it at university.
Okay.
Not that I can recall anyway.
And anything mentionable with C++ you did?
Well, C++ for me, it's interesting because it's a really good language, but I will say Java has some of these problems too, but it's really hard to really easy to trip yourself up with reference counting and pointers. And if you get that wrong, and that would constantly do my head in. It was one of those things of if I had it in my head, I needed to use it because a few months later I'd forget how it all works and have to relearn it again. Yeah. That was certainly a very big challenge with, C and C++.
Okay. And with Java, so you started with Java, you like that? Immediately, or? Well,
I taught myself Java, I think the first job I had in the UK, which would have been in 99. And I think that might have been the first time I played with it. And I really enjoyed it. It was obviously, looking back on it now compared to what we have these days, it's like, wow, I don't know how I survived with that because there's so many things that have gotten so much better and easier over the years. But at the time, it was like, this is like fantastic, so much easier to use. And I hadn't, prior to that, because the first job I had out of uni, I should say, was at IBM, and in Australia, in their what they called Global Services Australia. So it was like their consulting and service side of things, as opposed to the hardware software side.
Okay.
And I started out doing things with like PL1, JCL programming, Kix, a lot of AIX stuff, and that was kind of like an interesting introduction to the enterprise world, so to speak, after coming from university where you're doing sort of the more cooler, interesting things like C++, and then suddenly you're dealing with like 30-year-old languages.
But Kix and CTG, Common Transaction Gateway, they're actually not as bad, right? I mean, this is like...
Kix wasn't too bad. We had a system called RCMS, which had like Kix screens and all this kind of stuff, and would go off and do things behind the scenes. That was pretty intense because I think that application, if I remember, had been written like maybe 6 or 7 years before I started, and so it was like adding bits to it here and there and fixing bugs. So it was a large piece of code to get to grips with. But it was a really good introduction to work after university and a good kind of stepping stone to stuff.
Yeah, but Kix stands for concurrent. Consumer information concurrent system, something like this, right? This is
something like that. Yeah. It's been a while since I've dealt with it, so I can't remember what it stands for, but it sounds like it's right.
Okay.
But so I kind of worked at IBM for a couple of years, and then I decided to move to the UK. Mm-hmm. And my first job there was at Friends Provident, which is an insurance company, and it was there that I kind of taught myself Java, and we started using. We wanted to write a new quotation engine, have a quotation system, and we used Java to create that. So we did everything from scratch there, and I don't think anyone on the team had any prior Java knowledge.
Okay.
So we kind of all taught ourselves and helped each other out. But it was really cool because they had a previous quotation engine that was written in C++, and they would package that as a DLL. So then I created a JNI layer to wrap the DLL to then call it from the Java code. So that was certainly an interesting challenge to do, given that I just basically taught myself Java, and here I am trying to understand JNI and pass the right values back and forth and all that kind of stuff. But it was a lot of fun.
Which Java version was it? You know it?
I think it was 1.2.
Okay. And what is quotation engine? What is the purpose of a quotation
So
engine?
the quotation engine was basically a huge chunk of an algorithm that you could feed in details of a person, and it would spit out like, this is how much we're going to charge you a month for life insurance kind of thing.
Okay. So it's almost like AI, right? Now we would say it as this is an AI, of course.
Probably, yeah. These days, yeah. But back then, it was just an engine that you'd feed a bunch of variables in, and it would spit a number out, and that would be it.
And was this project successful?
Yeah, it was the first time. I think it was even the first time Chris Provident had done any Java project, and it might have even been the first time they did some kind of web UI. I'm trying to remember. Did we use JSF?
No. I don't think so.
Oh, no. It would have been JSPs, I think, back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had like a full web UI of like entering information and then calling down to the DLL to get the quotes and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was their first like basically web insurance quotation system that they developed. And
maybe it was Struts 1, I would suppose, Struts, because it was a mix of servlets was the controller, JSPs was the view. It was very common back then. Insurance companies, and so they all used Struts.
Now that you say that, it might have been Struts. But from what I remember, it was very successful and was continued to be used for long after that. And I think, I'm trying to remember, what did we use for that? We used Power Builder, and I think it was maybe even Ball and JBuilder as well.
I like JBuilder. It was a great tool. And what I really liked was the look and feel of JBuilder. It was like, nice. Also, Visual H for Java from IBM also looked nice.
Yes. I do remember using that. I don't know if we used that at Friends Prominent, but I do remember using that around that time. And yeah, it was a really nice UI. Got a little heavy and slow after updates, but it was certainly a very nice UI.
Actually, all the IDEs had their own aesthetics, right? There was a Semantic Visual Cafe, complete different look and feel. Then there was JBuilder, different with the JBCL. Visual H was completely different to all the others. And the Sun Studio Workshop was the worst from the UI perspective. And IntelliJ, it was not called it was IDEA, JetBrains, I think.
Yes.
And it also looked nice back then, yeah.
Yeah, IntelliJ's always looked nice, or IDEA before that, but I'm trying to think, what did we...
Are they still named IDEA? No, right? The IDEA, I think, is gone, I think.
I think so, yeah. I think it's just IntelliJ now.
Yeah. Okay, so what was the next project in Java? So
I think that was kind of the main one I did at Friends Provident. After that, I joined... I think I moved to Dublin after that, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
I moved to Dublin and worked for a software house there that focused on insurance software.
Okay.
And their whole thing was in Java. So they had also had like quotation engines, web UIs. And there I was responsible for designing the integration with various backends for like requesting blood work for insurance and all this kind of stuff. And that was XML APIs and a large amount of XSLT.
Oh, it would be prior to SOAP, okay.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of XSLT and...
but you could actually nowadays sell XSLT as a functional language,
Well, I'm trying to think, this would have been like 18, 19 years ago, and it was, back then, XSLT was insane. It was...
FOP,
some of the stuff
FOP and Cocoon.
Oh,
right?
yeah, dealt with FOP.
And Cocoon. Cocoon was the idea. Apache Cocoon was the idea that you can actually create, the entire portal with XML and XSLT.
Yeah, thankfully I didn't have to deal with that a lot. FOP I did for some stuff.
PDF, right? PDF rendering is a classic one.
Rendering PDFs. But some of the XSLT I had to do was like a huge amount of recursion and using keys. Yeah. And we would have like 3,000 or 4,000 line XSLT files to deal with the conversion between different formats for what we store as data and what the external providers do. And each different provider had a different format. So it was probably I think it's the most complex XML interface I've ever had to deal with. But once it was there, the XSLT made it a lot easier.
Yeah. And what I remember now with XSLT, a brief idea from the past, but what I remember is that the browsers were capable. If you specify the XSLT and XML, they were able to perform the transformation on the fly, right?
Yes, I think they were. And I
I'm
think
really curious whether it still
a few
works. It would be
times.
cool hack. If you show something like this right now, everyone was really, it's like, why it's working? Because you could actually specify somehow this XSLT and the browser will render in browser from the XML the page. I would have to try it out. So this is a...
Yeah, I do vaguely recall doing that a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got no idea if it works these days.
What I do from time to time, I still use the marquee tag still works. This is like...
Yeah.
And everyone is like, hey, look, this marquee and it works. And this is like, if you believe in web standards, it will work in 20 years as well. And everyone's, wow. It's like, Blink doesn't work anymore, but marquee is still working. Okay, nice. Another quotation engine in Dublin. And what was your next, mission?
After there, a couple of years there, I moved back to London and found a job at Lloyd's TSB, the bank there.
Okay.
And that's when I was working for a consultancy first. I tell a lie. I was working for a consultancy that started out with CBeyond, like an integration thing, kind of like Tibco.
CBeyond. Yeah. I remember this. They had integration broker had to evaluate the CBeyond E-Ways or something like this. This was like an integration backend, yeah.
Yeah, and
what happens with them? Were they bought or they disappeared?
I think they disappeared because this was like 2003, and they hired a whole bunch of consultants. This consultancy to thinking that CBeyond was going to be huge. They were going to get lots of business. They trained us all up for weeks on it, and then I think I sat on the bench for like months and months.
Okay.
And like only like a handful of us ever actually got on site anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then they retrained us all into Chordient, which was a JavaE based CRM solution.
What is the name? Chordient, do you say?
Chordient, yes. Chordiant.
Okay.
They were later bought by Pegasystems, maybe like 12 or 13 years ago.
Okay.
So we started learning Chordient, and that was like a bunch of EJBs and CMP beans and all this kind of stuff. And
still CMP. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. So they trained us up on that, and we did some work for them there. And then I ended up joining Lloyd's TSB, and they had a huge Chordient install there. So probably for the next like 3 or 4 years after that, I was doing a lot of contracting and consulting in Chordient, either in London or in Brussels or in Eindhoven as well.
Wow. And then?
Kind of all over the place for a while.
Interesting. So then you got, your JavaE or J2E back then knowledge, right?
Yeah, J2E, yeah.
And actually, CMP worked somehow. So if you knew what you are doing, we actually built a large system with CMP. The only problem was it was a little bit, chatty to develop. So there was the various deployment descriptors. So I tried to generate them with XDoclet. Probably use XDoclet as well, right? To generate the stuff.
I think we did, yeah.
And then from the XDoclet, this was like the doclets. They look like annotations, and this how annotations happen. So the first EJB3 was actually the Java doc translated to annotations.
Yeah, so we did a lot of that, and that was at the bank there. They used Chordient, and so I was also developing a lot of systems, web front ends and stuff at that time with JSF and everything to feed into Chordient. So that was a lot of Java and J2E, and that was certainly a good experience working on various projects for the bank there.
Okay.
Let me think. What next?
Yeah, what next?
I worked for a few years, and I think then the big thing I did was I think I left them and worked for a company in London called the see if I can remember the acronym, MCPSPRS Alliance.
Wow.
Basically, their job was to collect royalties from TV stations, radio stations for any music that's used, and then distributing to them to the artists and stuff like that.
Oh. This is how Rolling Stones happened, probably, on the U2, right?
Basically, yeah. And I'm trying to think, did they might have used Chordient as well, but then we also developed a whole bunch of systems with Java and J2EE. And we were I remember I was kind of one of the leads there, and a new system we built, we had this whole framework developed, and we had a whole bunch of aspect-oriented programming pieces to wrap stuff, because we're like, we don't trust the junior guys to do the right thing, so we're going to wrap their methods with all this other stuff.
You are the guy who's wrapping and interaction, so I know who to blame, So so you build, the mappers, DTOs, aspects, you used AOP, point cuts.
We used a lot of AOP in that project. It was fun to learn, but it's powerful, but it can be dangerous at the same time.
And surprisingly, it just disappeared.
Yeah.
No one talks about AOP anymore. And I remember back then there was even AOP Alliance. who would try to promote their whole IOP idea. And for me, it was always strange because I started with J2E from the beginning, and we always had, AOP built in. The transactions and sessions and monitoring, everything was AOP. And the others didn't have that, and they use AOP, and I asked the AOP guys, what are the killer use cases? I got the answer, transactions, logging, monitoring. Say, okay, but we already have it. And what's the point then of AOP? And they say, yeah, business cases. But then I say, okay, if you do business, if you find something from the business perspective, it's great. But there are not a lot of use cases,
Yeah, no, I think we had a lot of things like, as you say, logging, any kind of monitoring. I think we even did some business logic wrapping as well, just because I can't remember exactly, but some of the methods we were like writing in our essentially controllers would have to do some boilerplate stuff.
Yep.
And it was like, rather than have the boilerplate in every method, we're just going to write an AOP to deal with it.
Yep.
So it was convenient from that perspective, but it did make understanding the code pretty complex because it wasn't all on one spot.
Yeah, and exactly. And what I could imagine back then is like historization. If you call a method, you have to create additional metadata, like from, when, and so forth. This could be but without annotations, it's hard because how to document this stuff in XML, you have to look always into places. Okay, nice. So you created some frameworks which I can cut out. Just for your CV. And what happened after your framework time?
Then I went back to Lloyd's, but moved into kind of more enterprise architecture side of things. So it wasn't necessarily a lot of hands-on coding. It was coming up with architectural plans for new projects, how they integrate with the existing projects in the bank, and all that kind of stuff.
UML?
Yeah, a lot of UML, a lot of design documents.
Which year was it? Which year? I mean, now we have to be almost yesterday. So you say couple of years?
This is probably like 05, 06, 07 kind of time frame.
Okay.
And actually, it might have been 06, 07 I'm up to now. And I think we even used like Rational Modeler to like model things and
Rational
stuff like
rows.
that. Yeah, Rational rows, yeah. But one of the big things I was involved with there was when Lloyd's TSB bought Halifax. I was part of the group of enterprise architects that designed how to take the 33 million customer bank accounts from Halifax and merge them into Lloyd's TSB.
Okay.
And that was like, I think 18 months of like planning before like we actually had the cutover. But I look back on that and still laugh that even in back then, it was like 13, 14 years ago, the whole plan was basically a data dump, and then someone would throw like tape drives in a van and drive from Halifax in the UK down to London to then load them in.
Yeah, now it's called Amazon Snowflake. Then you get the truck with a hard disk from Amazon, then you can move your data. So
yeah, but I still chuckle about that occasionally. But yeah, so and then after that,
there's actually a saying: never underestimate, the how it's called, not the bandwidth of a truck. Or something like this.
Yes. Yeah. No, exactly. And it was kind of surprising even for back then, the amount of stuff that was very much manual and for the truck with the data, it was more a case of not necessarily being safer. It was just going to be faster just because of the pipe they had going between Halifax and London and the amount of data.
Yeah.
It would take it way longer than just driving it down, which is funny, but.
And it worked out. So that.
Yeah.
You were in the truck or not? No.
Okay. I wasn't in the truck. I think I left Lloyd's maybe a couple of months before the cutover actually happened. Because I moved back to Sydney at that point. Was working for an investment bank out there, creating like a stock trading platform.
Oh,
with like J2EE, doing like complex event processing. I was using a ton of JBoss stuff back then.
CEP is the predecessor of Kafka, you can call it, right?
Yeah. Basically, yeah. And that was a lot of fun. But our move to Australia only lasted like 9 or 10 months, and then we came back to the UK. Didn't work out there. It was just one of these like childhood dreams of remembering how great Sydney was, and then it's like, actually, you know what? I don't really like being so hot all the time.
This is what I wanted to ask you. So you spent some time in London, in Sydney, and in Dublin. And which now in Boston, which location do you like the most?
It's tricky. I love London because it's definitely very multicultural. It's got a lot of history there, and it's so easy to get around in terms of either walking or busing places or the tube. But I really loved like living in Brussels. That was a fantastic place. Obviously, the beer and waffles are amazing. But yeah, there was just something about Brussels and it being a little bit smaller than London, but still kind of that old historical like look to the place. And yeah, I really loved it.
And why not Dublin?
I didn't live in the center of Dublin, so maybe that kind of colors my view. I was kind of maybe 40 minutes south of the center of Dublin.
Okay.
But Dublin is a great place to visit, but it's also, well, when I was there, it was very expensive to live in the city.
Okay, understand. Okay. Then 2 questions. The merger with the track and the tapes, was it successful? So
yes,
were they able to migrate everything?
Yeah, I was involved in touch with the head architect after the fact, and they said, yeah, it went off smoothly. No real issues. So that was really nice to hear.
Yeah, interesting. Because I'm really delighted because my past, I was always involved in task forces and projects that were not that successful. I was the firefighter, and I hear you, and so everything went smoothly. So, okay, nice and interesting, actually.
Well, yeah, it went smoothly, but it was also like 18 months or more of planning. And
yeah, but still, waterfall never works. In your case, it worked. You planned for 18 months, and then it worked. So it is amazing.
Well, we also had, I think, 3 or 4 trial runs before the actual day of like going through the ETL process and trying everything out and making sure there weren't any glitches. And there would be glitches in those, and then we'd work to improve the process to resolve them and make sure they didn't happen again.
Okay. And the CAP stuff from Sydney with the it also worked. What you did, with the
yeah.
Okay.
My understanding is that trading platform is still used today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting story. So, what is your next successful project?
After that, we came back to London, and I did some more work at Lloyd's for a little while before we moved here. And when we moved to Boston, I actually started out in the consulting with Red Hat when I first started.
How you found Red Hat?
Yeah, Red Hat was the first job when I moved to the US. And you
wanted to work with them, or because of your JBoss past, or
it was just pure chance. Like prior to that, I'd actually when am I thinking? Like 2008. When I was working in London, I actually paid out of my own pocket to go to JBoss World in Florida at the time. Mm-hmm. And I met Pete Muir and some of those guys back then. And I think I'd started contributing to Seam 3 prior to joining Red Hat, but it wasn't like a plan. It was just one of the companies I was looking at.
Why you contributed to Seam? I mean, usually if you know how it happens, I mean, you had to.
Well, I started writing probably when we were in Sydney on the side. I started using Seam 2 at the time to write a CRM solution for, I think it was for weddings at the time, because I'd been, after getting married, I chatted with our wedding photographer a lot, and he said there's a huge gap in the market. So I started playing around with Seam 2 for that, to create something for that. It never came off because the wedding planning side of things, after doing it once, it just wasn't enough of an interest to keep me interested in writing something that dealt with that all the time.
And I can imagine this is really mission critical, right? If you mess up a wedding, I mean...
well, certainly for, the grooms, but certainly the brides are not going to be happy if you mess up their wedding.
Yeah.
So I started playing with Seam 2, and then when Seam 3 came along, I actually got involved in contributing to that, and I think I was responsible for the internationalization module of Seam 3 at the time.
Or as a contributor?
This was as an open source contributor, so I was doing that while I was working at Lloyd's in London.
But why? I mean, I can imagine internationalization is not that interesting, right? I mean,
not overly, but thankfully, James Perkins and David Lloyd had already done a bunch of stuff around JBoss logging, and we were able to piggyback the same kind of idea for Seam 3, internationalization, to basically use annotations on an interface and have it generate all the different language versions.
Okay, this is interesting. And it was just for fun, or I mean, what is your plan? I mean, you have
I think at that time I was still contemplating trying to do this wedding CRM planning thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it was just at that time Seam 2 had kind of been sunset and Seam 3 came around. Mm-hmm. So I was involved in helping out just to, I guess, get more familiar. So getting to know Lincoln Baxter the third and Pete, and I don't think Gavin was involved in the project with Seam 3. He was focused on the CDI stuff. But yeah, it was mostly just for fun and to learn and to do. I think that was my first forays into open source.
I don't know whether you had the chance to listen to the episode with Lincoln, and I already interviewed him.
No, I haven't yet.
Yeah, you have to listen to it because the Lincoln, he creates his own startup right now, and he
Yes.
used Node.js at the backend. And I say, hey, you have to use Quarkus. And it was really, Quarkus, really? And we had a chat, and now he will try now to have Quarkus because he found out that Node.js can have some performance problems. So let's see what happens. So you have to ping Lincoln again and say, hey, use Quarkus.
I'll have to get in touch with him.
So and then after your contribution, probably what happened, Red Hat asked you, to join Red Hat. I guess this is how they operate.
Well,
right?
yeah, it was Red Hat was one of the people I was looking at when I first moved to the US, and it was on the consulting side. So I started there, and for the first 9 to 12 months I was at Red Hat, I was consulting with Putnam Investments in Boston, another investment company.
Okay.
And probably the main, it was kind of funny because I joined like the 6th of December. So I'll be coming up on 10 years in a couple of months at Red Hat. And I joined, and literally that week I was told that the consultant that was meant to be running the project was leaving Red Hat. And, I'd be running the project. And I'm like, okay. So that was kind of a trial by fire. But the main project there was like migrating 250 applications off of Oracle Application Server onto JBoss EAP5 at the time.
That's interesting. Was JBoss EAP5 JBoss 5?
Yes. Sorry. Probably wasn't called EAP back then. It would have been just JBoss 5.
Because JBoss 5 was officially declared back then by Red Hat as not operational, right? Because they had some severe problems. I think the idea was back then not to use JBoss 5, rather than go straight to JBoss 6, because I remember, and I was with a product manager from JBoss back then, and they told me, no, JBoss 5 is you don't get any support because they have some problems. And then they fixed that in JBoss 6, and then it was good again. Maybe it was JBoss EAP 5, which probably was JBoss 4 or something like this, because something like this.
Maybe, yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Because JBoss 5, I remember vividly, this JBoss 5 had some problems. And and it was also successful, I suppose. You migrated all the...
Yeah, we migrated the apps. It seems to be that when I've been consulting, things have gone pretty smoothly. It's when I've become an engineer that things get cancelled.
Okay. Then I'm now curious about your first unsuccessful project, okay? So,
well, I guess unsuccessful is the wrong term, just maybe like mothballed, because I joined Red Hat Engineering after a year of being on consulting.
Okay.
And the first projects I worked on was JBoss Portal, and I led the Portlet bridge, which was the whole JSF to Portlet kind of mapping thing. And did that for a couple of years before Red Hat was like, okay, we're kind of mothballing portals. They're not the future. And so that kind of ended. Yeah. And then I, with Bob McWhirter, founded a project called Live Oak, which was a mobile backend as a service framework. It was built on Ned.
What was the name of the project?
Live Oak.
Never heard about that.
Okay, I'll have to find that and send it to you. It was really cool and fun to play with. It was entirely built on Netty, and we basically had what we called resources, which was basically extension points, and you could convert anything into a URL path, whether it was like a file system, a database. You could then access all these things as a URL path. And then we had like an admin console that you could then install or remove these different extension points.
This is similar to Slingshot. You remember Slingshot, Apache Slingshot? It was like a CMS, which is URI based, as I know. Okay, it's interesting.
Okay, yeah. So we did that for a couple of years, and then Red Hat bought Feed Henry, and obviously that was Node.js based, and they weren't interested in Java, so that was the end of that project.
Okay.
And then I did some developer tooling stuff with Pete Muir for a while, and then shortly after that, Bob and I started Wildfly Swarm, and that became Thorntail.
So we had discussion with John, and lately, I always say, okay, you probably hate me because we met a couple of times, at conferences, and you came to me and try, to present me Wildfly Swarm, and I always said, why you are doing this? I mean, Wildfly is just, fine, it's just small enough, and this is still my opinion, and I never understood what was the idea of Wildfly Swarm. Can you talk about it now, or is it confidential? Or
no, I don't think so. It's basically the main premises of Wildfly Swarm was to slim it down to only the bits you need, and the kind of crux of that is that with Wildfly, although your application may only use certain bits, there's still a lot of stuff there that you may or may not need depending on the application. So the whole idea with Wildfly Swarm was to be able to shrink that footprint down to reduce any kind of problems or potential attack areas because your application doesn't need them. So like if you're not using EJBs, you don't need to have EJBs there. If you're not using security because it's an entirely internal app, then you don't need all the security stuff there. So that was the kind of main premise, was to be able to slim it down. And it just so happened that at the time, like Uber jars were popular. So that's kind of the packaging approach we took for that as well.
And why I was so against that, because I was in several Glassfish projects back then. And the clients ask me, we don't need JSF. Can you remove JSF for us, or can you remove EJBs for us? And you could perfectly do this because they were OSGI bundles. It was enough to remove, the bundle, and it worked. And I just played with it, and I removed EJBs, and this was like, I find out that an entire OSGI module for HJB was 600K kilobyte. I remember 671 kilobyte was in one point because I thought it was much larger. Then I removed something else. I removed almost everything, and there was almost no difference. It turned out that the server were really optimized, and this was also my observation in Whitefly. If I never, for instance, I tested in one point of time Whitefly full versus Whitefly web profile, and the difference was a little. I said, okay, then come on. Why I should, create my own unique snowflake if I could just, pick the stock Whitefly and be like all other projects? I was strictly against the changes, and what really I didn't like at all was the way how Whitefly Swarm was marketed, like right size your services. And I say, but I mean, my services are not big, and it's not like Whitefly is huge. I mean, there's probably 5 megabyte of difference. And then the page where I had to choose, would I like to have JAX REST or REST Easy with transactions, without transactions? Oh, I said, okay, come on. I would like to have everything, and then later decide. And this is, if you came to me at conference, I'll say, okay, what I can tell you, I mean, this is completely pointless from the usability perspective, right? And then something interesting happened. Red Hat approached me, so I got a ping. And we are working on a new runtime. So, okay, again, probably, Whitefly Swarm 3 with, something. And then Quarkus came out, and I have to say, I was really surprised, actually. So, because for me, it was not like trying, to make something smaller, because it was like rethinking how it should be.
Yeah.
And I never saw the idea, actually, I have to admit, I never thought about that you don't need all the reflection. You can read the metadata and generate code. And if I understood this, I said, this is genius, because we can keep whatever we had, and do something completely different. And I was Quarkus from day one. I think I wrote the very first article in Germany about Quarkus because someone asked me. And from then, for me, it was natural. Okay, Quarkus is a different beast. I can still... And actually, migration to Quarkus was not a big deal. So I was actually interested about your take. What was your opinion about Whitefly? You measured the difference between Whitefly and Swarm, or was it like you were assigned to the Swarm project and you tried just to do as much as possible with Swarm without, looking at Whitefly? Because you had also to recognize that there was not a much difference between Whitefly Swarm and Whitefly, right?
So I guess at the time there was certainly an interest in exploring like how Whitefly could be slimmed and whether it was feasible. Because when we first started Whitefly Swarm, we weren't even sure it would work. Like you could even do what we were thinking. We thought you should be able to because of JBoss modules, but we just didn't know like how easy it would be. So from that perspective, it was more an exploration, and then it kind of became Whitefly Swarm. From a size perspective, it's probably not hugely different, but I know with Swarm we were able to do some more interesting things in terms of being able to configure it with YAML and properties files instead of like the server XML and things like that.
Don't say you. The next question is, you like YAML personally to write YAML
when it's concise, but I don't necessarily like it when it's like 500, 600 lines long. That's very hard to grok. Like the Kubernetes YAML is very hard, and I've been bitten by indentation many times in the past. And they're really hard to spot. But if you're talking like a YAML that's like 20 lines, then
no problem. But then we can go with Java properties. What's the difference, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why Swarm offered both. You could do properties.
I have to admit, I did lots of Kubernetes. Recently, I was able to add a config map to a template and a secret, and it worked immediately. So I was stunned. It's like the first. Now I'm probably the senior cloud native developer, because I managed with Visual Studio Code without any help to intend it correctly. And I think I understand the arrays a little bit and the typing a little bit, but it's still, I still don't get it, how YAML could become popular. I mean, whatever we had, XML was chatty, but you could just write it and it worked, right? Or you got an error.
Yeah, well, and I guess
properties are also not bad. I mean, and YAML, okay. I mean, if it is written to read is okay, but yeah.
Well,
but we cannot change that. Forget it. So, but what I got, you could use for different things than YAML, but you could do something more interesting with Swarm, which was not possible with Whitefly. What I liked with Swarm the most is HoloJar. I saw that, so that is interesting because there's the stupid UberJar, I never got them. I say this is completely pointless, but the HoloJar is interesting because there was almost like deployment. You have the Swarm, which is the base layer, and you can have my jar. And this is was it your idea, the HoloJar?
I can't remember whether it was mine or Bob's or someone else's, but yeah, that was even with the popularity at the time of UberJars, the HoloJar was. It may have even been John Klingen's, actually, now that I think of it. But to be able to take something and actually have that Docker layer that can remain unchanged, really a huge push for why we wanted to do that.
Yeah, perfect. So, and then it was renamed to Thorntail.
Yeah.
Why?
There was a lot of confusion once it started becoming a product, Wildfly Swarm.
Okay.
The Wildfly was a product. Actually, no, it was even worse because you had Wildfly that was the community. You had JBoss EAP that was the product. And people were like, why is it not called JBoss EAP Swarm? Because you're like, it's Wildfly Swarm in community.
Okay.
And it's Wildfly in community, but it's EAP in product, but you're calling it Wildfly Swarm in product. It's like, it was too confusing for people to kind of separate in their minds as to why it shouldn't be named the same way that Wildfly was. So we kind of needed to break the association with Wildfly to kind of have it be its own thing.
And the Thorntail was end of life because of Quarkus, I guess, right?
Yeah, so the community side for Thorntail is now end of life. Product-wise, it's still going for at least another 6 to 9 months. But yeah, it's all because of Quarkus. We kind of what we'd done in Thorntail and the ideas we'd had around Thorntail future versions, because I'd actually been spending 6 months working on a V4 of Thorntail, which was a complete rewrite around CDI containers.
Okay.
That all fed into what Quarkus became. And then you kind of throw in the ahead of time compilation for Quarkus and the whole native image stuff, and it just became this huge thing that is like a fairly evolutionary leap forward from what we had in Thorntail.
Evolutionary leap forward. This is perfect. This is exactly what it is. And you started with Quarkus from day one?
Yeah, I was part of the original group of like half dozen to dozen that were involved in the POC, mostly to make sure that what we did with Quarkus worked both from incorporating what we had in Thorntail and the lessons learned, but also from the Eclipse microprofile side.
Okay. And what are you doing right now? What is your areas of operation?
So right now I'm focused on kind of figuring out a good architecture for Quarkus's observability stuff. Uh-huh. So part of that has been working with Aaron on adding the micrometer extension to Quarkus. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing a lot of work with OpenTelemetry right now as well to figure out how that can play with micrometer and give us a good metrics tracing solution for Quarkus, and also then to feed that into Eclipse microprofile in the future.
Oh, very good. Because I had some arguments with the microprofile metrics on GitHub issues, and what I do with the metrics is the technical metrics are a little bit out of scope because they are just there and you can just use them. And because of my background firefighting and problems in projects, I rely on the business metrics a little bit more. And what I wanted to suggest is custom scopes, or how to call it. You have the application scope, Yes. And this is my interesting part. And I say, why not have application / and I could define my own, how to call it, areas or scopes. And the feedback was they're thinking about removing the application. I say, come on. This would be a really bad idea to remove the application scope. And they said, okay, because Micrometer doesn't have the scopes. I say, who cares about Micrometer? I mean, whatever Micrometer does. And another guy, how is it called? From Tommy Tribe. He was in Tommy Tribe, and now he's no more. I forgot his name.
Romain?
Yes. And he also had similar observations. And for me, the OpenTelemetry is probably good for machines. So if you have Prometheus, it could just scrape everything and it's done. But we are actually using in projects the application scopes almost for humans, because it's okay, there's no / everything is from the scraper. But if we go / application something, we could have almost business metrics. And my idea is in projects that we are building like more or less business components, which is a package with added value. Let's say we have quotes, right? So I have a quotes package, and what I would do immediately, just introduce a counter, which just counts the quotes, and then this was my first thing to see whether it actually works. This was my first thing I'm doing, and then because quotes you build that are somehow complex. So there's an algorithm involved. So I would expose, let's say, successful quotes and not so successful quotes. So even on domain business level, I would expose several counters. But this only makes sense if I could create my own scope or make it some structure. And if everything is flat, then we need something else, because then the entire metrics become useless for KPIs.
Okay, that's certainly good feedback, because I know one of the main drivers for looking at Micrometer and including that in Quarkus is that it's heavily used in Spring and Spring Boot. It's heavily used in Micronaut. It's used in other Java frameworks and ecosystem and part of the ecosystem. And we felt that the way it handled metrics better aligned with how SREs are trying to view things than MP Metrics does today. I don't know off the top of my head how you could do something like you're talking about to be able to segregate metrics, but I know you can use what Micrometer calls meter filters to say, I want to filter all these metrics with this information in them and send it to a particular registry. So you can create like a Prometheus registry that only has application metrics in it, so that you're not getting the fire hose of all the JVM stuff.
It's not scope, it's registry type. This is what I wanted to have. Exactly, this is the name.
Yeah. So you can do those things in Micrometer. It's kind of just done in a slightly different way.
Exactly, because what I had a brief chat with Erin yesterday, and she said, okay, hopefully not with annotations, or we had just the J4K.
Yeah,
and what the developers do in my projects, they annotate all the JAX-RS resources with metered, and they are happy that they expose make the system more observable. And my point is, okay, we don't have to do it, because if we just parse the Nginx log, we will probably see exactly the same information. So I don't do it at all. What's for me more interesting is the internal state of the system. And to give you an example, in one project we use GMS, and it could be Kafka, but it was GMS, and we received the message. And if you have an asynchronous system with messages, it's of course interesting how many messages are poisoned, so the type is not right, and messages which were consumed, and there are several states. And what I did immediately, I exposed that via counters.
Yeah.
And this is perfect, because then you only have to set alert, to a specific registry and say, look, if we get any poison messages, just raise an alert. But if I get a firehose metrics, it is pointless. So I would say, regardless what Spring Boot is doing, I don't care. What I would really like to have is like my own area for business metrics, or we need another microprofile spec which just does that, right? And for instance, what I do, I start with counters and gauges. This is the golden thing. And with that, we can achieve 80%. And afterwards, we add meters and timed and simple timed, whatever. This comes afterwards.
I know once we've kind of got some work done on Quarkus and figured some of this out, we're going to be bringing it back to the microprofile community to talk about in detail, because we're going to have a large discussion around MP metrics and what the future is. That's kind of been one of the issues to date, is that a lot of the MP metrics was assuming that developers would have to essentially create framework metrics as opposed to just business metrics.
Okay.
So that's certainly something that the spec can look at, is to move away from worrying about what happens in terms of like HTTP endpoint calls and things like that, and saying that that's handled by Micrometer with their meter binders. If you use JAX-RS or whatever, it kind of comes with. Yeah. And focus on a spec that's around how do you create business metrics.
Yeah,
and how to filter that.
Perfect, because it's the same. It's the same discussion I have about service mesh, Istio and service meshes, and they say, okay, default tolerance we don't need anymore because Istio can handle that. Okay, I would say I don't believe that, because this would be the same if we would say 10 years ago we don't have to provide any monitoring, any robustness, because Apache already does that. Because what Istio only sees is the outside traffic and not what's inside the application. So something like a circuit breaker, you can only do it regarding to traffic. What I can do inside the application, I have far more insight in which state my application is, and Istio just cannot do this. And this is the same discussion, right?
Oh, it's very similar, yeah. And I know that's a similar issue I've had with Istio and service meshes, is that Granted, there are some things that like microprofile fault tolerance today can delegate to Istio for that kind of circuit breaking.
Yeah.
But things like fallbacks and other things like that, to do that in Istio just isn't either easy or really making sense, because Istio is not going to know what a fallback should be a business method as to what should be returned if it can't get a response. So there needs to be coordination between the two to make sure that they're working together and you don't end up in a situation where you've got dual circuit breakers, for instance. You've got one in the app and one in Istio, so you end up with double delays or issues because they're both tracking
the next
separately.
Thing is how to test that, right? Because someone will have to configure the service mesh. Who is in charge? Probably the developer. But with everything included in microprofile or in my app, I can easily test it without even deploying to the Kubernetes. So I mean, this is what's interesting, because if we get done double configuration, the Istio configuration and our application configuration, and there is almost like deployment as cryptos 20 years ago. It's the same problem. Everything is distributed. I mean, and so this is why sometimes I wonder, why what problem does it solve? And if I ask, common question to me, what's my opinion about service meshes and Istios? I go, why you would like to know? Which problem do you have? And it's okay, now I just wanted to chat with you about Istios. Okay, we can also chat about ice or beer or whatever, right? So, but for it, there are some use cases like certificate, distribution perfect, and but for the circuit breakers, I don't get it. Exactly the same, like the firehose and micrometer for technical stuff, absolutely fine, just do it. But for business, we need something, for that. And you said open telemetry. So what I think will also happen is, in one point of time, CNCF, that the open tracing and open metrics will merge, right? There's a lot of talk about.
Yeah, so they're merging in open telemetry. I don't know if open tracing is still kind of doing releases. I think they might have stopped and focused on open telemetry. Open sensors, I think, is more about the format, so that might still exist. But yeah, open telemetry is kind of bringing together the open tracing for tracing, the open sensors for metrics, and defining semantic conventions for what the names of traces and attributes should be, what the names of metrics and their label tags should be. So that's hopefully going to get a huge alignment across all languages.
But then we will get in microprofile 4, 5, or 6, like a merge of two specs, right?
Yeah, we still need to figure out how that's going to work, because obviously OpenTelemetry includes metrics and tracing. So today we have MP metrics and MP open tracing specs. Do we keep them separate and just adjust to what they're doing? Do we have like an MP open telemetry spec that combines them? Or do we just say that there are no specs for these things and it's this thing out here and use that API? There's lots of different options. We just need to talk through it in the community.
Because the open tracing is very thin one, right? This is just basically traced, and so
there's for MP open tracing, it's like one annotation.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just defining how it integrates with JAX-RS and REST client and stuff like that.
Actually, this is one of the coolest spec. One annotation and the highest amount of advantage if you use it. Just
and I think that's something in general that we need to think about at Microprofile more, is to be, I guess you could say, less heavy-handed in trying to define a whole bunch of stuff and try and keep things simple and focused on how can we make this work in CDI kind of thing, rather than a general let's boil the ocean kind of situation.
What I also thought what could be helpful in microprofile is like logging, but not exaggerated logging. It's just take like a logger, a view log levels, and that's it, because we don't need a lot. It's just system out println is actually what happens at the end of the day, and we only need some some log levels, and then we could have a line, all the metrics are logged in, I don't know, in info level or whatever, so some alignment with the other specs. This could be helpful. Right now Quarkus does it actually a great job, because regardless what you are using, always the same happens. So I use the Java util logging, and it works perfectly. And this is really nice. Now a little bit problematic topic, let's say. And I hear voices, that the microprofile in Jakarta E have to be merged. I don't see the point. I mean, because the CNCF, all the specs, not everything, Open API, I don't think it's CNCF, is a standalone specification. But what we talk about right now is beyond the control of Java and application servers and application runtimes. It happens outside. And whatever they do, we have to align. And this is why microprofile has shorter release cycles. And from my point of view, this Jakarta is stable, because Is this the same stability like yesterday I talked at the Eclipse booth story that for me, the Jakarta E is more like an iPhone, right? So the first, 2 releases were very excited and everyone expected something else. But at one point of time, after 10 years, in the case of Jakarta E, 20 years, everything is already improved. So what I can expect, I cannot just know what to invent in CDI. It's hard to improve CDI further. I mean, probably we will get new features in Java SE, and then we can do something aligned. But it's not like, I don't think we could, of course, if we just invite all the people who are working with Jakarta E and say, okay, what we could really improve, is really hard to find something revolutionary.
Well, and I think the challenge for the Jakarta community as well is kind of figuring out what they want to do, because obviously previously there was huge emphasis on backward compatibility, making sure things didn't break, and all these kind of very important things for large enterprise customers, because they don't want to have to be rewriting their apps every 2 years. And the challenge is they want Jakarta to be like more cloud native and more focused in this respect. And it's the existing specifications weren't built and designed in a world where cloud native was a thing. So it kind of needs to figure out how much down that path it goes, and how is it do it in terms of like, is it rewriting all the existing specs to be more cloud native, or compatible with like native image and Project Leaden for the JDK? And it's like, that's potentially a large amount of work to rewrite 20 or 30 specifications to take advantage of this kind of new world we're in these days. And so from my perspective, it kind of makes sense kind of have microprofile focus in that area. But obviously everyone has their own perspective and views as to where things should be.
My perspective is a little bit different, because microprofile already uses, a lot of Jakarta E. So what I always saying, I don't see the difference, because, CDI, JSON-B, JSON-P, JAX-RS come actually from Java E. And if you would like to use bin validation, WebSocket, servlets, it is also pulls from Jakarta E. And if you JMS is, I would say, still a thing, MQTT, not everything is a Kafka. It's a completely different use case between Kafka and JMS. So this could be a thing to modernize JMS. But and what I would do in the case, if I had the only power, the dictator, if I were the Jakarta E dictator, I would try to remove as much as possible all the SOAP, all the stuff, done. I would even remove, I really like EJBs, but with Quarkus, we could get rid of EJBs. What I would really need to do is to have some pooling in place. Yeah. And I tell you, a nice use case for pooling. So recently I created a online workshop for microprofile, and I wanted just to use microprofile things because it's okay, let's see. And I used the GraalVM for JavaScript, and this is a little bit heavy if GraalVM starts initially with the JavaScript stuff. And I use that for rendering. So I can use my JavaScript library, Mustache, for instance, and I can pull content with JSON and have no in-place rendering. So I wanted to use that. I could use Mutiny, but I say, okay, Mutiny is just Quarkus invention, and I would like to use something a little bit more standardized. So back in the days with EJBs, what I did the same with Nashorn. I just injected the Nashorn thing into EJB, and this was done. So I had 5 instances, and it was perfect. And actually, it solved all the problems, because 5 instances, you can access all the EJBs individually. There was no concurrent issues with EJBs and with JavaScript. And GraalVM has the same issues. You cannot just share, the JavaScript space around threads, across threads. So I would probably implement either my own scope or something with CDI, but it doesn't come out of the box. So there are lots of use cases. And if this is solved, if you get something like a pooled scope or something like this, then we can actually remove EJBs completely, I would say. Yeah,
well, and I think that's part of the problem that Jakarta has right now, is it has a couple of different programming models. It has the EJB one, it has the CDI one. And it makes it confusing for anyone writing new stuff now as to what they should do. From like my understanding and chatting with the guys that work on CDI and Weld, CDI I think counts for like maybe 90 or 95% of what EJB offers. There's only very small things that are actually missing. And I don't think they're that difficult to potentially add to CDI. But yeah, it's certainly around the older technologies like SOAP, EJBs. They're the challenging ones, because the enterprises still have them, still use them, and still need support for them. But you can't get rid of them, but you don't want to advance them either.
But the next version of Jakarta E, we just get shipped without them. And if the enterprise would keep with them, so they can just buy support from whatever, and I mean, there's not a problem. And let's say if I were the dictator, I would first remove everything, and then merge everything to one platform. So we have like, the base platform, which just comprises CDI, JAX-RS, whatever, nicely aligned. And the micro profile would be the next layer with the cloud native technologies or GraphQL, whatever is more volatile and not as stable. Because I consider Jakarta is like it's boring operating system, like the Linux. It doesn't have to change every month. It is like stable.
Yeah.
And the micro profile has to change. Otherwise, we have problem with CNCF, OpenAPI, and all the others, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. There's definitely very two different models there, and it's going to take both communities working together to come up with a solution. And certainly, as you said, a microprofile is one possible option for Jakarta to have that as a layer that fits in, but is a faster changing thing. I know I've also seen a lot of talk about desire to have Jakarta releases every 12 months or even more often than that. And personally, I feel like that's a bit dangerous because it gets away from the stability of Jakarta. Yeah. And you're going to find that vendors and customers aren't picking up every release because it's just changing too frequently if we get to that point.
And my feedback, because I spend most of my time in projects, is actually if I explain my clients don't care about the difference between microprofile and Jakarta E, just use whatever is there. And all application servers or runtime support both. So you can you can download Whitefly, you have everything. So just use it and no one has a problem with it. It's not like you to think the entire day, should we pick microprofile or Jakarta E? No, everything is there. So I think there's no need. No need to. You have the problem as a vendor. As a user, it's great because I can say, I came in projects. Like, look, if you're IBM shop, pick OpenLiberty. If you like Glassfish, pick Payara. And if you have completely new, try Quarkus or Helidon. And I'm out because I'm not involved in politics. I don't have to convince which runtime to choose. They choose whatever they like to choose, and I just focus on my technology on the problem solving. And this is actually great, right?
Yeah, and that was certainly one of the goals when Microprofile was created, was that it wanted to do things faster than Java E had been doing things, but it also didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So that's why it's based on CDI, JAX-RS, JSON P&B. It's we want to build extensions to some core pieces of the Jakarta programming model that we think fit cloud native, and not create things that are completely different and won't work with CDI or JAX-RS. It's we want to have that extension. So I think it fits naturally. It's just how to. I think the challenge right now is Jakarta is kind of wanting to do a lot of the things that Microprofile does today. So that presents a bit of a challenge in terms of the mindset and what Jakarta is trying to do and how it fits with the whole backward compatible non-breaking story. It's going to be an interesting challenge.
And this is what I don't understand at all. I just was in the mailing list and I saw the discussion around config, whether it's the config in Microprofile and Jakarta E. And I say, okay, nice that you spend some cycles about talking about that, but users don't care. Because what I did at this week, there was a conference. I was invited to a conference, interesting story. And as a media partner, I'm not a publisher. And then actually I searched for the conference and it turned out 2012, I delivered a talk with the name Java E, the future is now, but is not evenly distributed yet. And what I found is the old source code.
Oh, wow.
It was 8 years old. And what I did is I downloaded during the talk, or even yesterday at the Eclipse booth, I downloaded Whitefly 20.1, which was 2 days old, I think, JDK 15. And then I ported the application by recompiling that, and it ran without any modification 20.1. And I did the microprofile thing. And used microprofile configuration with that. So I extended the 8 years old project with microprofile, and it just worked, And no one cares whether the config comes now from Jakarta E, from Whitefly 20.1, or from microprofile. From user perspective, it doesn't matter. As long as all the runtimes support both, we don't have that problem. And right now, we're in a lucky situation that all popular application servers and runtimes come with Jakarta in microprofile at once, which is great.
Yeah, well, with Quarkus, we just need to say that it's not all of Jakarta is there. Obviously, EJBs is one thing that's definitely not there, but we consider the core pieces of Jakarta for cloud native are certainly there.
Quarkus is similar. Let's say Quarkus, what I do is Quarkus, very similar advice. I think if you need something, look at SmallRye first, because this is the microprofile. Exceptionist REST client. You have to rename it. The REST client is the only thing which doesn't know is named after small rise, so you have to know it. The Quarkus REST client, and then if you need to know undertow servlet, then bean validation or WebSockets, and you get or JMS. I don't know JMS. I didn't use JMS. JMS is also available. I use it with not as extension rather than as a library. And you have parts of Jakarta E in Quarkus.
Yeah.
It is not 100%, but it's 95% or 90%.
Well, we think it's kind of like the key use cases are covered.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Listen, we are way over time, but what I really would like to do is to re-invite you back and talk about, microprofile more in detail and micrometer and all the stuff. And I have a little bit different opinion about cloud native and Jakarta E, and the reason being is, for me, is Jakarta E also cloud native. It's not a lot different, except, you don't need a deployment model, but if you look at the specs, I mean, they run everywhere in every Docker container. So I would like to talk more specifically about that. No time for now. Next year, January or February would be really nice. And it was really nice to talk with you right now. We have never time, to talk at conference. So this was...
and one of us is always rushing off to either another session or a presentation or something. But this has been fantastic. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you. And in the next few weeks, I will just publish that and write a tweet about next podcast.
Definitely will. Thanks very much, Adam.